Hi there, this is Jane Butel with Chilies and Chilies showing you how to make homemade flour tortillas. They're made with wheat flour, water, lard, baking powder, sugar, and salt. I really prefer lard because it gives a little better result. It makes more tender flour tortillas because it is shorter, meaning that it holds more water and it shortens the gluten strands or protein strands in flour better than vegetable shortening or butter. Here you see the preferred method, or one of the preferred methods for measuring flour. You really need to either fluff the flour, like here I'm doing with a spoon, or you should sift the flour, because flour settles and you can gain a fourth of a cup for every cup that you thought you were getting if you just scoop the flour without fluffing it or sifting it. So here we're just leveling it across just to get a nice even measurement. If you got a cup and a fourth for every cup you really intended to get, the dough would just become like brick hard, and a lot of people think that there's something wrong, but it's just the measuring of the flour. You just need to really fluff it or sift it. So here we've added the dry ingredients, the baking powder, salt, and sugar, and I'm just stirring them in just to make sure they're evenly blended, like you would for most any quick bread. Now I'm adding the lard, and there's different ways you can cut it in. I find that my hands are the fastest. You can use a device like this, which is called a pastry blender. You can also use two knives or whatever else what you like. So here we go. I just take my thumb and rub the lard, kind of like a corduroy, I call it, method, which I guess sounds funny. But anyhow, you rub the lard across your fingers with the flour mixture until the lard actually has almost disappeared. It's just so well integrated that it has changed the texture of the mixture to resemble kind of like cornmeal. See, I've just pressed it all together in my palm, and I'm letting it go now. And it's ready to add the warm water. The water doesn't have to be boiling. It should be warm. And we just add all of it at once. Don't dribble it in. It's best all at once. And you want the dough to be a very moist, kind of almost sloppy, soggy dough. And that way, if you don't ever get a sloppy, very moist dough at the very beginning, then you will never get nice, thin tortillas. So if you find that the dough is really bunched up and kind of hard like concrete, you really need to immediately add some warm water. You will not hurt them by doing that. You just will have to knead them a little more if you get too much. In other words, you'll have to knead in more flour to make a nice smooth dough. And I find it best to just dump it all out on a board or a countertop or whatever you like to knead on, and just save the bowl. You don't need to wash it at this point. Just sort of set it aside, and it becomes the kind of like the incubator for where you will place the dough. So now we're just going to start the kneading process. And here it's critical. It's really, really, really important to be careful to not put too much flour into the dough at one time, because if you put too much flour in too quickly, it's impossible to tell what the texture is becoming, and you could easily get it to be too dry and too hard, and your tortillas will then be really thick and kind of gummy like, and they won't be nearly as good as if you're stingy with the flour. So I like to use this utensil. I guess you can't see it too well, but it's called a baker's friend or a bench knife, and you use it to spread kind of evenly spread the flour out so that you don't get too much at once. And here I'm just using the kneading process of pulling it with my left hand around, sort of like a clockwise motion, and then I push it with my right hand. So you push it around with your left, or pull it around with your left, and then push it forward with your palm of your right, and you just kind of keep going. I guess I'm doing it pretty fast, but you just keep moving it rolling it over and over, adding a skimpy amount of flour each time until the dough really kind of gets pretty firm and it stands up. And here's the gluten test. This is a really fun thing to know. You take a little, just a little bunch of the dough and stretch it between your fingers and see how thin it just comes out into almost little hairs. With that springiness, that's the gluten or the protein in the flour, and that's wonderful. You need to get any bread dough to this point. If you don't get the gluten developed, it won't be bread. It'll be kind of like a brick. So here we go. We're just going to need it maybe just a wee bit more to get it a little smoother and get it into a ball. And now it's very springy at this point, so we need to relax the gluten or just kind of let it rest. We're just going to set it aside. And this is why I like to put the glass bowl over it, because it keeps the air out and it actually speeds up or enhances. It enhances the moisture and the time it takes. It takes less time when it's all covered like that. It's better than a moist cloth or something. So here we're now taking the bench knife, or you could use a regular knife, and we're cutting the dough into 12 equal portions. Fundamentally, you get 3 flour tortillas for each cup of flour. And so now that I've divided into these kind of little pie-shaped wedges, I'm going to take each one of those little wedges and make a dough ball out of it. And to do and it's important to do this because that's how you set the shape to be round. Otherwise, it could be like the state of Texas or Florida or somewhere else. So what I'm doing is I just get a little flour on my fingers and I'm just kind of working it around, tucking it under and pinching at the same time. And then when I think it's pretty round, I just kind of give it a little pat, to flatten it a bit, and then keep track of the order in which you have made the balls, because the one that you have made first will be the dough will be the most relaxed and the easiest to roll. So here we go. We're going to make 12 of these little dough balls and get them all set up ready for baking. You don't fry these, you actually bake them on a medium-high heat underneath. I like to use a cast iron. It's called a comal in Spanish, or in English we just call it a griddle. But the cast iron holds more heat than does aluminum. And it's a little slower than steel. If you have a steel comal, which I also have, it tends to quickly burn them. So you don't really want to risk that. And you should only roll each one at a time. In other words, don't roll all 12 of them, because you'll have to just do it again, because the dough is quite springy. Again, this is from the gluten. So we're trying to roll it to be as round as possible. And this little device we're using is called a bollillo. It's an 8-inch, actually it's an 8-inch long, 2-inch wide dowel pin piece. It's just a little tiny rolling pin. Because it's uniformly round and because it's so short, you can put a lot of pressure on it, which is ideal for making the flour tortillas. You can use a longer rolling pin, but it doesn't manipulate quite as rapidly and as well. And if you get one that's too thin around, like some of the pizza rolling pins, they tend to make little waves in the dough, and they don't work quite as well either. So the ideal is that 8-inch long bollillo. So here I just stretch it over my knuckles a little bit to try to get it as thin as possible, and then I sort of do the daring thing of I flip it down on that hot comal or griddle, and then I take my fingers and just kind of pull it out a bit when it's still just freshly laid down. And when you see the bubbles start, like you can just start to see them, I'm poking it with my finger. When the bubbles get pretty uniform or scattered across the top of the tortilla, then it's done. See the bubbles coming? It's kind of like those bubbles that open up when you're making pancakes, except here the gluten's so well developed that it won't open up. And the natives always flip these with their fingers, but it's pretty hot, and it takes quite a bit of practice to flip them with your fingers. So ideally you will not turn it back and forth, because that'll dry them out. So you wait to turn it until it has some brown flecks, and then you can tell when the second side is starting to brown, because it'll bubble also again. See here, it's starting to bubble, and I just sort of pick it up a little, and I can see that it's done. And so we can just put it in a tortilla warmer, and then you'll go about baking each one just the same way. See how that's the second side is never as pretty as the top side. And here you have the 12 tortillas. And this recipe is, for the written recipe, always go to my blog, Chilies and Chilies, at janebutelcooking.blogspot.com. And you'll see the recipe right there, and you can print it off or copy it, whatever you like.